In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cardinal Crimes. Before we jump into it, I just want to put out there that I am aiming to do bi-weekly episodes for the next few months as my family and I are making a big move overseas, and all of the appointments and everything that we need to do is all kind of happening right now, all at once. And so I needed to just cut back for a minute so I could put all of my focus and attention on that. In our last episode, we began discussing the new Netflix series Adolescence, which explores why some young men turn to violence. It's a fantastic series, one I would highly recommend everyone watch. Watching it made me want to cover a couple of cases where young men are involved. Now, in our last episode, we discussed the murder of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey by 14-year-old Aiden Fucci. And this week, we are going to be exploring another case, and we're going to be bringing it back to Iowa. This case involves two teenage boys, and like the case of Aiden Fucci, this one's also fairly recent. Let's get into the murder of Nohema Graber. I first heard about this case when it started gaining a lot of traction in the news, and this was back in 2022. And I remember one of the first articles I saw on this case had the headline of, quote, "Iowa teenagers kill Spanish teacher over a bad grade." And that is exactly what happened. On November 2nd, 2021, two 16-year-old boys, Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, beat their 66-year-old Spanish teacher, Nohema Graber, to death. The motive itself is sickening, but digging deeper, the two teens planned the murder for weeks. They surveilled and stalked Miss Graber to learn her routine. They made a list of supplies and made a very specific and detailed plan as to how they would accomplish it. So let's go through a timeline of events here. Now, according to an Iowa Supreme Court opinion filed in October of 2024, Willard Miller, 16 years old at the time, had been struggling in his Spanish class, and he was worried that his low grades in his Spanish class would interfere with his ability to study abroad in Spain. I don't know if your high school had this, mine did. We were able to take a trip to either Mexico or Costa Rica, with our Spanish class. So my assumption is that's potentially what this was in relation to. But in addition to the poor grades, he also claimed that Nohema Graber, the Spanish teacher, treated him unfairly. And according to the opinion around this time, which the opinion describes as being just the fall of 2021, Miller began making, quote, dark jokes about killing Mrs. Graber to his friends. And among these friends was Jeremy Goodale. Now, I don't know how long these, quote, dark jokes went on for, or how many friends he even expressed those sentiments to. And I don't know what tone those jokes were in. He could have just started out maybe venting his frustrations, and maybe those dark jokes were truly made in a humorous tone. Not excusing it, but you know what I mean. But at a certain point, Jeremy Goodale told Willard Miller that he would help him kill Mrs. Graber. And so, beginning on October 24th, and possibly before that, the two made very meticulous and specific plans to do so. According to the Iowa Supreme Court opinion, on October 24th, Willard Miller made multiple internet searches on his iPhone relating to the plan. Some of these searches included, what happens to students' work if the teacher dies in the middle of a term? And do students receive credit for a class if the professor is seriously injured or dies more than halfway through the course? Now, when I first heard that in this case, the motive was supposedly that they killed the teacher because of a bad grade, I thought it was obscene. And I thought it was ridiculous and maybe just a little thing that the news had kind of picked up and they were running with it for headlines. But the more I've dug into this case and when you see these internet searches, I really think that is exactly what the motive was. That was their entire goal. On October 30th, a note on Miller's iPhone, which was titled Prep, had more details on their plan to kill Mrs. Graber. They had a list of supplies which included bush clippers, sticks, garden gloves, plastic gloves, a trash bag, Ziploc bags, wet wipes, a backpack, hammer, cover, and transport vehicle. One of the most scary things, I think, is that he also detailed what he called the quote procedure to kill Mrs. Graber in that same note on his iPhone. So the opinion, the Supreme Court opinion quotes it and it says, quote, stun, move off trail, empty compartments, load cargo, blanket cargo, deactivate compartment contents, leave bag by exit, transport, empty transport, safety stun, switch glove, deactivate article to bag, finalize the win, and in parentheses it says secure victory, load into storage spot, don't forget to close the door to the ground, switch glove, move the sticks, wipe down tools, dispose article, and grab bag by exit. Done. That is so chilling, so scary to think about. I mean, he's clearly also trying to be like almost like talking in code in what he's writing in this note on his iPhone. And so when you think about the level of planning that these two teenagers put into it, they also have, it seems to me, an awareness that what they're doing is wrong because they're not saying things outright in the notes. They're, searching things on their iPhone, but it's like nothing explicit. Now, apparently around this time, which would have been just days before the actual murder, he had said some pretty disturbing things to a classmate. He told a classmate that he, quote, knew Graber's routes and could easily hit her with a bat if he wanted. He also told that classmate to not go to the police out of rashness if Graber went missing in the next 2 weeks. I have talked about this before in other episodes, and I will continue to talk about it because I think it's a fascinating thing that happens when you're looking at certain crimes, and especially when you're looking at adolescents. It's that they're essentially leaking their plans ahead of time, and it's literally a concept known as leakage. And I was first introduced to this concept when I was researching mass shooters for a paper I was writing for my master's. And you see it in a lot of these other cases as well. You saw it with Aiden Fucci that we just talked about in the last episode. He explicitly told his two friends what he was going to do just weeks before he did it. And I don't know. And sometimes in the research, it says that this type of leakage can be interpreted as a call for help. That, kids who commit crimes like mass shootings or whatever are in a state of crisis and intervention is obviously needed. But when they're kind of leaking their plans ahead of time, some researchers interpret that as a call for help. I'm not an expert. I don't know if I would say that in this case. It almost seemed like maybe they had another friend that was a little more clued into the plans and they were trying to, stop that specific person from potentially going to police once they carried out their plan. That's kind of how I'm interpreting it. I'm not sure. But Miller was not joking when he said that they knew Mrs. Graber's routes. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale stalked Mrs. Graber for at least 2 weeks. They would follow her after school and literally drive and follow her to see what she was doing every single day. They made specific notes of Mrs. Graber's evening routine, and what they found was that Nohema Graber took a walk each day after school at Chautauqua Park. Nohema Graber's obituary states that she was an avid walker and was very disciplined in her practice, and she loved to be outside. She loved to be outside enjoying nature, and Miller and Goodale took advantage of that, and they murdered her in a place that was special and meaningful to her. And I think that, along with so many other aspects of this case, just make it so tragic. So now let's go to November 2nd. Miller and his mother actually met with Mrs. Graber at the high school to discuss his Spanish grades and how to improve them. And according to the opinion, Miller claimed that meeting had went well, but after school, Miller and Goodale went to Chautauqua Park and waited for Miss Graber. So I haven't seen any more information on what exactly was conveyed at this meeting. If their goal really was to kill Mrs. Graber because his poor grades would impact his ability to study abroad, I don't know. Maybe in this meeting, she made it clear that, like, hey, we're going to try to improve these grades, but where it's at right now, you're not going to be able to go on this trip. And maybe that's why they still continued. I don't know. But according to a timeline published in a KCCI Des Moines article, Mrs. Graber left Fairfield High School before 4 p.m. and went to Chautauqua State Park. At some point along Miss Graber's walk in the park, Jeremy Goodale was looking out for anyone who would see them and gave Miller an all-clear signal. Miller struck Mrs. Graber on the head with a baseball bat. He hit her multiple times before handing the bat over to Goodale. According to Goodale, she wasn't dead when Miller handed him the bat, so he struck her again. The two teenage boys then dragged Mrs. Graber's body into the woods, and they took the keys to her van. They moved the van into a wooded area beyond a dead end near the park. They also took $75 from her wallet, which the two of them split. The two then parted ways for a time, but they came back later that evening to further dispose of Mrs. Graber's body. The KCCI article says that at 4:42 p.m., Mrs. Graber's vehicle left Chautauqua Park. It doesn't give any more clarifying information on that, but I think that must have been the time that Miller and Goodale moved her van to that area beyond a dead end. Now, before the two came back to the park, Goodale stopped at Miller's home to grab a red wheelbarrow that Miller had left outside for him to grab. Goodale also brought a tarp and a shovel, and Miller brought an air pump in case the wheelbarrow tire went flat. So they strike Mrs. Graber. They kind of hide her body a little bit, but then they leave. They're trying to get out of there, but they have to go back and cover their tracks a little more. And so once Goodale arrives back at the park, he found Miller using a flashlight and cleaning wipes to spot clean blood from the trail. They then moved Mrs. Graber's body again, and their plan initially was to dig a hole to put her in. But this is in early November, and apparently the ground was too frozen, so they were not able to dig. So they instead decided to cover her body with a tarp and the wheelbarrow. I've read in other articles, were trying to just make it look like it was just a pile of garbage that maybe nobody would notice. But after that, they went home. I saw in another article that apparently after they did all of this, they went back to one of the two's homes and proceeded to get drunk. Now, on November 3rd, Mrs. Graber's husband, Paul, reported her missing. He had actually been out of town the previous day, and I'm not sure if he got home the next day and saw she wasn't home, or if the school maybe contacted him when she didn't show up for work. The Iowa Supreme Court opinion said that police had discovered Graber never arrived at work, but either way, she was reported missing the morning of the 3rd. At this point in time, a community-wide search begins. And at the same time, at Fairfield High School, Goodale and Miller are probably committing the cardinal sin for anyone wanting to get away with murder, and they are seemingly telling everyone about it. The Supreme Court opinion says that Miller told a classmate, quote, "I caught a body with a baseball bat." When the class was wondering about Mrs. Graber's absence, Goodale also messaged multiple people on Snapchat and detailed how he and a friend killed her because she, quote, failed the wrong students. The recipients of those messages, thank God, went to the police with screenshots. The police said that the messages contained information on how they followed Graber, how they killed her, what they did with her body, her vehicle, and any potential evidence. That same day, later on, Nohema Graber's body was found in the woods of Chautauqua Park. Likely that same day, Miller and Goodale were brought in for questioning. Now, in Miller's police interview, he initially denies any knowledge of Graber's murder, and as usually happens, his story changes multiple times. But he kept trying to, in each of his stories, tie in one element, and he really wanted it to stick. Now, he kept saying a variation of the story that he was at the park, he was at Chautauqua Park, but that he encountered a group of masked individuals that included Goodale dragging Mrs. Graber's body. Miller was asked at a certain point if there was any chance that his DNA would be found near the crime scenes, and Miller said that Goodale and two others approached him and pressured him into letting them use his wheelbarrow to move the body. So he's very quickly trying to throw Jeremy Goodale under the bus. And he's trying to make it seem like he was at the park for completely innocent reasons. But that doesn't make any sense. Like, they came up and they're like, hey, can we use your wheelbarrow? Why would he be at the park with a wheelbarrow? It doesn't make any sense. But anyways, he is taken into custody, and according to the Iowa Supreme Court opinion, he was reunited with Jeremy Goodale, and there's apparently a moment where they were alone with each other, and my assumption is that they were maybe in an interview room and didn't realize they were being recorded, but that's just me thinking. And there's a moment that they're with each other, and Miller told Goodale to say that there were 8 people from Ottawa involved in the murder, and that he had made up a very convincing lie that would throw police off. Miller tells Goodale this, but, leaves out the part where he included Goodale in that group of 8. Now, the state subsequently charged the two with first-degree murder, and according to an article from KKTV, in May of 2022, the 2 teenage boys found out that they would be tried as adults. I don't have all of the details on this specific part, but there was an article where the judge said that if the 2 were found guilty, the juvenile system would not have been able to detain them for more than 6 months beyond their 19th birthdays. And the judge didn't think that would be enough time for any possible rehabilitation for such a serious offense. But I don't know the ins and outs of, being tried as a juvenile and an adult for murder charges in Iowa. That's something I'd have to default to a lawyer on. But anyways, I think that though this switch to trying them as an adult had a huge impact because both of them eventually plead guilty. Miller pled guilty on April 19th, 2023, and Jeremy Goodale also eventually pled guilty. I don't have the specific date on when he did that, though. So let's talk about the 2 sentencing hearings for both Jeremy Goodale and Willard Miller. Now, we're going to start with Jeremy Goodale. His sentencing hearing happened in November of 2023. It actually happened after Willard Miller, but I'm just going to talk about him first. So his sentencing hearing was 2 days long, and several witnesses testified during his sentencing hearing, including law enforcement, some of his own family members, and a board-certified clinical and forensic psychologist. The court eventually, after the sentencing hearing, sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Now, during sentencing, the psychologist Dr. Mark Cunningham was a psychologist that was retained by Jeremy Goodale and his defense team. And during his testimony, according to a separate Iowa court opinion, the psychologist believes that there is a high likelihood of rehabilitation for Jeremy Goodale. Dr. Cunningham, during his testimony, described multiple factors that he believes contributed to Goodale's actions at the time. Cunningham described Goodale's upbringing as being dysfunctional. Jeremy Goodale's mother was apparently pretty detached and eventually left the family. He also talked about Goodale's father and how he was constantly unhappy with his schooling, his school administrators. He was very opposed to vaccines, was self-described as being, quote, anti-woke and, quote, anti all kinds of things. The psychologist brought those up and said it showed that the, quote, larger community didn't seem to be something his father identified with. And while unintentional, those views likely did impact Jeremy's social identification and his development of a kind of community morality and view of authority figures. There was a moment during the psychologist's testimony where he was asked if Goodale's parents loved him, and he had kind of an awkward response. He never said outright yes or no. He said that they tried the best they could given the circumstances, but he also said he believed that Goodale had been pretty sheltered and controlled. Now, the psychologist talked about Jeremy's cognitive development and noted that adolescents are generally more susceptible to peer pressure, but that Goodale seemed unusually socially dependent, especially when it came to his friend Willard Miller. Cunningham said he believed Jeremy was more vulnerable to peer pressure and also more immature than others his age. Goodale, in his own words during a confession, said he went along with it because he, quote, didn't want to seem like a pussy. Goodale's attorneys did appeal his sentence. They requested a review for a, quote, abuse of discretion, which the court opinion defines as, quote, may exist if the sentencing court fails to consider a factor, gives significant weight to an improper factor, or arrives at a conclusion that is against the facts. Now, the court document says the court is required to consider several factors in determining whether a mandatory minimum term is appropriate. This is what they kind of list as the factors that they need to consider. 1, the age of the offender and the features of youthful behavior such as immaturity, impetuosity, and failure to appreciate risks and consequences. 2, the particular family and home environment that surround the youth. 3, the circumstances of the particular crime and all circumstances relating to youth that may have played a role in the commission of a crime. 4, the challenges for youthful offenders in navigating through the criminal process. And 5, the possibility of rehabilitation and the capacity for change. So this is all in the opinion. They eventually uphold the sentence, but I'm going to read their reasoning. This is directly from the opinion. Upon our own review of the record, we find the court thoroughly considered each of these factors when sentencing Goodale. While the court recognized that Goodale did not fully appreciate the consequences of his actions and was influenced by his co-defendant, it also noted that he, quote, was a bright student and intelligent teenager who, quote, could have stopped this from happening. The court also considered his home life, noting that while his relationship with his mother was strained, Goodale has a, quote, caring father and involved siblings. In terms of the crime itself, the court found it was cruel and, quote, as heinous of a murder as can be imagined, and that the brutality was a significant aggravating factor. But despite the seriousness of the charges and Goodale's inexperience with the legal system, he had zealous advocacy and was able to assist in his defense. Finally, Goodale was considered a very good candidate for rehabilitation if he is able to take advantage of the programming and education of the Iowa prison system. While the court found many of the Lyle factors mitigating, it determined that its imposed sentence, quote, balances the heinous criminal act of the defendant and loss of precious life with the required mitigating factors that juveniles are given under the law at sentencing. The court went on further, explaining why a minimum term was so necessary here. based on the egregiousness of the crime, where the victim was stalked and struck repeatedly with a baseball bat over a poor grade. The court stated this was not a typical juvenile murder case. This is beyond the pale. Some juveniles will deserve mandatory minimum imprisonment, and this does not constitute an abuse of discretion. There was also another little quote in there that said Goodale also claims that the sentencing court did not exercise any discretion at all and simply imposed a mandatory minimum sentence, but we do not find that this is supported by the record. The court conducted a painstaking, careful review of the case before imposing a minimum sentence and noted its requirement to consider the factors specified for juvenile offenders when exercising its discretion. We therefore find this argument without merit. Jeremy Goodale spoke at his sentencing hearing, and I am going to play that clip now.
I want to say I'm grateful for this chance to speak my piece. I offer my sincerest apologies to the Graber family, but I know my words will never be enough. I've had time to think on what to say, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. What I've taken can never be replaced. Every day I wish I could go back and stop myself, prevent this loss and this pain that I've caused everyone. Everyone in the community and outside of it, those closest to me and those closest to the Graber family, as well as the Graber family. I didn't know how taking Miss Graber's life would affect you. I can't comprehend losing a loved one in such an awful way. I'm sorry I didn't stop this from happening in the first place. I'm understanding now that Miss Graber meant so much to so many people. She was a support to the community and those close to her. And she was a caregiver to her family, to her children, and to her own husband. I'm so sorry. To Mrs. Graber's friends and the members of her church, I'm truly sorry for what I've taken from you. I never stopped to consider the community. To everyone at Fairfield High School who felt unsafe, those who were scared, those who lost hope, I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry how my actions have affected you. I want an apology to all my friends. I'm sorry for the stigma placed on you just for having known me. Zach, Habib, Zoe, and John, I didn't care. I didn't even know what this had done to you. And I'm sorry. And Dad, I'm sorry that I let you down in so many ways. Jackie and Sophia, you've given so much to me. I'm supposed to be helping you and Dominic right now, Jackie, but I can't. Instead, I've caused so much stress, and so much loss, and so much grief. And to all of my siblings, I took your little brother, and Dad, I took your son from you. 2 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. And I take full responsibility for what I did. And today, as a young man, I can begin to pay for that. I can never give back what I've taken. But I hope that this situation doesn't end as tragically as it began, and that someday something positive can come from this tragedy. I know that my words will never be enough, but to Miss Graber and all her family, I'm truly sorry. Thank you.
Now, let's talk about Willard Miller's sentencing. His sentencing took place before Jeremy Goodale's in July of 2023, so just a few months before Jeremy's. Miller's sentencing was only 7 hours long in comparison to the 2 days that Jeremy Goodale had, and he was eventually sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years, so 10 more years than what Goodale would eventually receive. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors showed evidence highlighting the severity of Graber's murder, including emails, police interviews, interviews of peers and the two of them, and social media messages. They really wanted to show and harp on the fact that this murder was premeditated. Multiple victim impact statements were also shared during the sentencing hearing, one from Nohema Graber's son, Christian. In part, he said, quote, "I want to talk to you directly. I still think there's potential for you to become a decent person as well. I don't see it at the moment, but I really hope that one day you can be." Now, this statement from her son is especially emotional because tragically, and literally just days before the hearing, Paul Graber, Nohema Graber's husband, passed away. And it was just the day before the hearing that they held his funeral. With that context, it just makes everything so much more tragic, and it really highlights the character of the Graber's son, Christian, that even with all of this tragedy, he still believes that there is hope for Miller. Now, from what I understand, there was no psychologist who testified as to the chances of Miller being rehabilitated, so I can't speak to that. From what I saw, there wasn't really a lot presented in terms of mitigating factors. They talk about his age at the time of the crime being just 16 years old, like Goodale's, and they argue that this makes him more susceptible to peer pressure and less capable of fully understanding his actions. But I want to highlight again, it seems as though Willard Miller was kind of the brains behind all of this, and that Jeremy Goodale was someone who just said he would help. They talk about his lack of criminal history, the fact that he eventually took responsibility for his actions, and that he apologized to the Graber family. I mean, he did eventually take responsibility for his actions, but he didn't actually plead guilty until, like over a year after the fact. And that was after he tried to move cops in a different direction. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing, to highlight or kind of harp on. I don't know. So he did apologize to the Graber family. I'm going to play the clip of his apology at a sentencing hearing right now.
I would like to take this opportunity to wholeheartedly accept responsibility for the role that I've played in the murder of Nohema Graber. I would like to apologize for my actions, first and foremost, to the family. I'm sincerely sorry for the distress that I've caused you and the devastation I've caused your family. And from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to hear about Paul Graber. I would also like to apologize to the community, to just the ripple effect that my actions have had, everyone that was affected. I would like to apologize to Nohema Graber's church. I know that I know now that she was a very active member there and doing a lot of good things there. I'd like to apologize for what I did and how that affected them. I would like to apologize to my family. I love you guys so much, and I'm really sorry for what I've done and how it's affected you. And I'm planning on getting back out there as soon as I can and make up for the lost time. I'd also like to apologize to the Goodale family. I'm sorry for the position that Jeremy's in, and I wish you the best, and I hope that he gets out as soon as possible. Sorry. I know what I did was wrong, and I accept responsibility for my carelessness, for my ignorance, and also I'd like to apologize to the police department and the investigators there for the misinformation I provided back in 2021, attempting to lead them on wild goose chase that I ended up getting. I'm sorry for that. to the Grabers, of course. And I ask that I'm given a chance, and I don't want to be institutionalized. I don't want to be in so long that I forget about what matters, where I come from, and what I need to do. I look forward to getting through this. Thank you.
If you are watching this on YouTube, you will be able to see how he delivers that apology. And I don't tend to read too much into kind of body language or how people speak. I mean, he's in a courtroom, a ton of people are staring at him. I think that would make anyone sound a little unnatural. And despite, the seriousness of the crime, probably was nervous to be standing up there talking. But to me, I just feel like this is less genuine than Goodale's confession. I mean, maybe it's just because Jeremy Goodale, was crying in his confession, but I really felt like they weren't fake tears. That's just me. Overall, when looking at this case, even the investigation and what was presented at sentencing, it didn't bring me any closer to a satisfying answer as to why they did this. I mean, yes, you have this motive. They were getting bad grades in Spanish class. One of them might not be able to study abroad. Yes, they are young and they didn't understand the consequences of their action, but I don't know. I mean, how does a 16-year-old not understand the consequences of murdering someone? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. I tend to believe they did understand the gravity of the situation, but they just didn't care. Or they were so warped and so wrapped up in their anger towards Mrs. Graber that it just didn't matter to them. I mean, were they so confident in themselves and their plan that they really just didn't think they'd get caught? That they would just go on and never suffer any consequences? These are the types of cases that really just kind of get to me because I just can't wrap my head around it. And maybe it's a fool's errand to do so. Just days after her murder, a memorial service was held, and the community came together to mourn the loss of such a beloved figure in their community. At the service, her son Christian read from Mrs. Graber's personal notebook. In it, he read, quote, "We, the teachers, must be a positive role model for our students. And even if the students forget about my Spanish classes, I hope they remember how and why to smile in life and be honest." That is all I have for this week's episode. And go watch that Netflix series, Adolescence. It's really good. It's really eye-opening. And I think there's a lot of conversations that need to be had around why young men turn to violence and how we can stop it. So thank you all, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself.